Okay, a quick overview of the situation in
Die Situation in England.
to say first that Sandra has done a wonderful job.
Sandra hat ein wunderbares.
She has dug very deep into one local situation. I will be giving you a broad overview of the whole national picture. So some of the main developments in the UK, now the national team that we have for FreshX, it never had the Roman Catholic representation, but always the Church of England, the Anglican, were the lead representation. But for the last 3 years, the Anglicans are not part of the ecumenical team. So this is a big change. It means that we are less involved in the ecumenical dimension for Fresh Expressions, but it's not that we aren't focusing on Fresh Expressions. We now instead have invested in our own national team just for the Church of England. So we've become less ecumenical in how we are developing FreshX, which is sadness for Mary and I, but that's the way the Church of England are doing it. So you will see all the different denominations that are involved in the national FreshX team. But as I say, the Anglicans now have created their own denominational team. Some overviews of the developments in the UK. Now we have, within the Fresh Expressions team, there is a team of teams. So there is one team looking at resources to equip local pioneers, and another team is working on networking to be communicating with both the different structures and organizations, different denominations, but also the different pioneers. So there's FreshX networking and FreshX resourcing. There are also multiplying regional networks. And so there are now pioneer communities in different regions of the country that meet to support one another. We've spoken a lot this morning about needing to support and encourage as we go on this adventure in the Patagonian wilderness. There are also learning communities, regional learning communities. And then there is now a national training app. So our regional training courses are now largely replaced by an online training app. There are mission focus hubs, just like Sandra was talking about hubs. We have a rural hub. We have a hub which gathers people from rural FreshX all across the UK. Similarly, one working with deprived, poor, inner urban communities. We have a pioneer hub, a coaching hub, etc. So again, a number of hubs. Nationally, there are now quarterly, so 4 times a year, and they have, with COVID, been online for the last 2 years. A major development has been that we have an interdenominational learning community, which meets 4 times a year, has all the denominations present, sharing their learning and experience of how they embed Fresh Expressions pioneering more effectively within their denomination, so that the denominations learn from one another. The online training is called the Godsend app, and that has been available now for about 4 or 5 years. And now they are rolling out Godsend communities. So communities of pioneers, all of whom are using the same online resource to journey as they begin, continue, and establish their Fresh Expression, and so becoming communities of praxis. In terms of facilities to support the movement, using both Zoom and StreamYard to communicate both national developments and also to host conversations between pioneers. In terms of strategy,
und miteinander über die Probleme reden.
A stepwise process to develop FreshX, and as I've just said, to support that, these Godsend communities will meet as teams. They will review where they're at.
Okay, gut. Dann versuchen Sie eben unterschiedliche Trainings.
It will function very much as a co-coaching mode, so that different pioneers are coaching one another is one of the models that will enable. Three things to look at as big picture in the church in the UK, and particularly the Church of England. Church planting, Gemeindepflanzung, is still alive and well and has a lot of finance from the Church of England, planting big city centre resource churches. And their journey, we would say, which will be familiar to you in FreshX Germany, is a worship first journey. But that's still happening. Need to be aware, a lot of money and resources going into high profile city centre church planting. Fresh Expressions is all about both some unique originals, but also some models like Kirche Kunterbund, Messy Church, Cafe Church, etc. And that, as you know, is a serving first missional journey. A new development, which we will say a bit more about in a minute, nationally, is an initiative called Myriad that is looking very much at a discipleship first journey based on small group discovery Bible studies, and a lot of finance going into that as well. Looking particularly at the Church of England, really important, I think, for understanding where we're up to and the radical new shift of putting Fresh Expressions right at the center of the vision and strategy of the whole Church of England, is a synod paper, which I've sent this morning to Birgit. So this could be copied to all the members of the roundtable. And I would recommend people who want to see how it's working, that's probably the best simple document to look at. So also the Church of England has started what it calls Greenhouse, that is learning communities for Fresh Expressions for any diocese in the UK, and about half our diocese. So back to the question to Sandra, is Bath and Wells, where she has given a case study, typical? I would say it's typical of about 50% of our 42 dioceses. We have many more dioceses than your lender. We have 42, probably about half of them would be at a similar stage to the story that Sandra has told. And then, as I mentioned in the last slide, this new Myriad initiative aims for thousands of these more discipleship-centered small communities. So this paper of the Church of England is General Synod Paper 2238, and it has three main aims: making the whole vision and strategy of the whole Church of England based on a mixed ecology, that it should become the norm in every context across England. Interestingly, it still is a mixed ecology because it says the parish system needs to be revitalized for mission, from which it will release all sorts of new Christian communities. So it's not just Fresh Expressions and the parish system, but there's a partnership with the parish system as the seedbed for many new Fresh Expressions. And then the conclusion of this new vision strategy document is that where every person in England can encounter the transformation from a life centered on Jesus with this pattern of parish and Fresh Expressions working together. This new strategy, Myriad, with the mixed ecology becoming the norm, the aim is to create 10,000 new Christian communities in 4 areas: in homes, in work and education, in social contexts, and in the digital world. So looking at the different realms in which people live their life. Now, that's the National Synod vision and strategy. It's important for you to understand that our history shows that does not equal implementation on the ground. That will be the test. The National bodies can make plans and strategies, but delivering those in each area, each parish, is a much bigger challenge. Just to look at the big picture again, the Church of England, again, as Sandra has very well illustrated, recognizing both ordained and lay pioneers, and that's now a complete movement with all our training institutions in the church, and training courses now are approved by the Central Church to work with people in context. So we now have about 20 regional courses training both pioneers and inherited church people alongside each other, that would be 1 day a week in training and four days a week in practical ministry. And that's now, well, the majority of all our training works that way. And most of them, as I say, regional and part-time schemes. Just to put alongside what Sandra has shared from the Bath and Wells, and the question that was asked, how typical is that? So here's a few other dioceses. York, that has a team leader for Fresh Expression on the diocesan staff. It then has a team leader to be promoting Fresh X among the emerging generation, the 15 to 35s. And then it has another team person who is working with all the parishes in the poorer neighborhoods to see mission and Fresh X in those contexts. So a team of 3. Manchester has 2 pioneers on its staff, one again focused on poor urban areas, developing Fresh X there. Another, because Manchester has a lot of ethnic communities, ethnic diversity, so a second pioneer is working to network and encourage Fresh X among ethnic communities. Carlisle Diocese, a very rural diocese, that has a team of 2. Again, one focusing on Fresh X among youth and young adults, another, because it's a rural diocese, encouraging and equipping for Fresh X in rural situations. In Sheffield, here where we are, we have 1 full-time post, but for the first time in 30 years, they have invited Mary and I to be part of the team to help them. We have nothing quite like the Erprobungsraum in Mitteldeutschland, where they have 4 people developing their Fresh X program. But you have to remember, Mitteldeutschland, I think, has over 2,000 parishes. So it is something like 2 or 3 times bigger than any of our parishes. So probably it's fairly, our diocese, fairly equivalent. Just to reflect on the pandemic and what that has induced in developments in the UK, the pandemic is clearly not yet over, but what is clear is that all sorts of the structure and the organization are, we would say, up in the air. They have not known how to respond. The trends have been that many of the things we've seen in the last 30 years have been speeded up in the last 2 years. And so people are ready to think in more creative, non-institutional ways because of the effects of the pandemic. We have already, outdoor church in the last 2 years has been multiplied much quicker where people can't meet in buildings. So Forest Church, Allotment Church, all sorts of initiatives. And online church, again, has grown enormously in the last 2 years. Many Fresh X's, we need to say, have not survived. They found it difficult with not being able to meet during the pandemic, but we are hoping it's a bit like post-Jerusalem, when persecution came. The believers have not been lost, but there will be a time of regrouping and discovering the new patterns that will emerge from the Fresh Expressions that haven't survived in their existing form. A strategy to support online church developments, what we're seeing is we need to move beyond just putting worship online with no interaction. A lot of things during the pandemic were just churches putting a front-led, one-directional understanding of church online. whereas we need to work out how you do a multi-directional community expression of church online. So what does it look like to form community online and to explore the context and the same questions and steps that conventional FreshX have had to journey on for the last 15, 20 years. Discerning the church and the mission future, again, looking very big picture, talking to the leaders of FreshX in the UK, they wonder whether church future will be more contextual, will be smaller, will be more local, and much more missional. The mission focus being more about being than doing. Again, I think this has been an effect of the pandemic, moving much more to being centered on being rather than doing an activity. And the mission future, therefore, could be about how do you live Sabbath as the people of God. And so climate change, of course, another major factor, as well as the pandemic. And there the language is all about wilding or rewilding the church and picking up ideas and creative initiatives from that. Just to finish, that's the big picture, a national. Sandra has done a wonderful job of looking at one diocese and digging down in that. This is just digging down one local parish, a village of Bardney, about 2,000 people. Here they have gone on a journey where they would use the language now more of blended economy or blended ecology rather than mixed. It's not having two streams that are both present. It's about mixing those streams so that now there's just like the yeast in the dough, the yeast is living in all aspects of the village. So a range of community engagement activities. They have every 2 months a community tea with about 80 people gathering from across the village. They have a village coffee shop run by Christians, mixture of Christians and non-Christians, open 5 days a week. They have a range of discipleship journey opportunities. Alpha happens in the coffee shop. There's a youth Alpha. The Lent course happens in the coffee shop. A range of prayer and worship patterns. So there's a room in a barn where there's a 5 day a week, twice a day prayer rhythm in the village. Then twice every other month, they have a filling station celebration. And so faith communities could be called FreshX, but they're all part of one whole. They do have Messy Church, they have a mums group, they have a monastic community, they have lots of things, but people are part of all of them. It's yeast going right through the village. Again, creative arts, they have all sorts of Christian creative arts initiatives, but it goes right across the village. So blended, a new picture rather than a mixed ecology. So there's a quick overview to add to the wonderful exposition that Sandra gave.